He has spent a life of service, and he will tell you a little bit about his connection to libraries as he talks to you today. We want to tell you about a little bit about his book that is published by the Wisconsin Historical Society Press. They wanted to make sure that the book launch was done here at Mitchell Street. Could have gone anywhere else in the city, but here in the heart of Milwaukee's Latinos community, this is the place where these stories really have a core for the community. As we begin, we want to thank all of our partners on this project. So, of course, Wisconsin Historical Society Press, who published the book. We want to thank Boswell Books, with books for sale today. And if any of you have not gotten coffee or sweets yet, Chihuahua is outside of the room around the corner, offering a fantastic array of lattes and delicious snacks for you to try. I especially want to thank you for coming to the library on a really hot, warm, beautiful, sunny summer day like today. It's days like this when people want to be outside gathering and just enjoying the sunshine. So for you to come indoors and gather with us here really means a lot that you're participating in this program when you could be dancing in the sunshine. It's days like this, the beginning of the summer season, that make me the happiest. This is the time of year I love the most. And one of the things I love about this time of year is the beginning of fresh produce season.
Buenas tardes. Oh, wait, I don't need this, right? Use my middle school teacher voice. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. It is an absolute pleasure to see the room filled with so many friends and family and people who are here to celebrate Jesus and everything that he's accomplished, not just in this book, but throughout his entire life. So let's just start by giving Jesus a round. I want to echo some of the thanks you already heard today from the Milwaukee Public Library for hosting this event. I was here in 2017 when my book came out, and in this very room, and it was filled with the same amount of joy, and I'm just really happy that we can have that as well here for Jesus. Thank you to the Historical Society Press for shepherding both of our books through this process and helping share these stories across the state of Wisconsin. Boswell Books for being here, and all of you as well. And of course, thank you, Jesus, who without him we would not be here to celebrate these wonderful stories. I've known Jesus now for almost 3 decades, since I was about 10 years old. I used to go with my mom to labor and immigration activist meetings, and I'd sit in the back of the room reading a book, and Jesus would be up in front of the room. I had no idea who he was. And it wasn't really until I became a historian when I really came to realize the work that he's doing in our community is one that stretches back decades. And I'm really excited for all of us to hear more about that history today. The book that we're celebrating today, Obreros Unidos, The Roots and Legacy of the Farm Workers Movement, arrives at an important time for our community and for our state. As I'm sure many of you know, the 2020 census found that our state has now nearly 500,000 Latino residents who call this state home. And Latinos now, of course, are the largest minority in the state of Wisconsin. Their population growth is happening not just in the traditional areas where they've settled over the last few decades here in places like Milwaukee or Waukesha or Madison or Green Bay, but they're settling in every single part of the state. In fact, every county in the last census saw a growth in its Latino population. So Jesus, in his book that we're going to hear about today, reminds us of 2 important things when we try to understand the growth of these populations today. The first, of course, which we'll hear about today, is that this history is not new. Even though these populations are growing across the state of Wisconsin, it's a history that stretches back over a century. And I think we're really fortunate to learn about a history specifically that begins in the 40s, 50s, and 60s that really helped this state become one of the most important agricultural producers, as well as being one of the most important places for union activism over the last half century.
voice is almost as loud as Sergio's, a little bit older than me, but I don't think I need a microphone to be heard at the rear of the room. I wanted to say something before I actually talk about my experience as a third-generation migrant worker. Say something about the place that we're in, and that is una biblioteca, library. While we were migrant workers, and I spent 10 years as a migrant worker, as I'll recount parts of that experience, we found ourselves in Henry, Illinois, harvesting experiments, okay? In a small community by the name of Henry, Illinois. And there was nothing to do on weekends except map the town with our feet, right? And so having an older brother who was very adventurous, we found ourselves in front of this place that said public library. And my brother says, come on, let's go in and check out the books. And he said, no, we should go in there. No, so it is a public library, right? So let's go in and knock on the door and see what books they have. Well, my brother Carlos and myself decided not to go. We continued walking in front of the park and waiting for Manuel, and Manuel comes out with a whole bunch of books, big, thick books. And the place that we lived in, we didn't even have an address. It was a migrant labor camp between a dirt road, off a county road. We didn't have any electricity, so my mother wouldn't let him use the few candles that we had because we had no electricity to read his books. So he had to read his books during the day. Well, he never finished even one book that he had got. But at the next place that we stopped, he goes directly to the library. This time we walked in with him. He knew exactly where he found the book that he had started. Why? This wonderful lady at the Henry, Illinois library had shown him the Dewey Decimal System. But he wouldn't tell us. He wouldn't tell us that there was a system how the books were organized. We thought it was magical. How did you know? Well, over many years we found out, of course, that that's the way libraries are organized. But we never recovered from that experience. I never would have finished high school, let alone gone getting a graduate degree without familiarizing myself with a lot of libraries, right? And that experience never left our family. My brother Manuel, after organizing to the field and getting back during these Vietnam era days and helping us organize farm workers, spent over a decade at the Milwaukee library, and of course kept us all engaged. All of my children were members of the Forest Home Library before it closed. My daughter Alejandra was a volunteer for the Bayview High School library, and the very kind teacher at the library wrote a letter to her. She became an LTE when they opened up the Bayview branch library, and now she's a decade later. She's at the downtown library working in circulation. So long history of librarians, but I thought I'd tell you that because we're now in a crisis here in the city of Milwaukee. And there are going to be major cutbacks, and whether it's the police department, the librarians, or whatever, we must safeguard these wonderful places. So I urge you, pardon the politics, but the third generation of migrant workers start with my grandfather, who comes from the southern part of Saltillo. They call it the Comarca area here, where the mountains empty. And the Comarca are various pools of water that the mountains empty there. Makes his way up into the Monclova area, which is one of the richest areas in the northern hemisphere. And he must have been working in the coal mines in his youth, because my grandmother tells me he never got rid of his cough. He makes his way, crosses, he meets my grandmother in Monclova in 1906, goes to Piedras Negras, and they cross over here in this area by the Nueces River. Some land speculators had found artesian water, and they were recruiting Mexican laborers to come in and open that land. These are the first 4 county areas that became known as a winter garden area, because we could grow vegetable crops when nobody else could. In the red block there is Zavala County, where my grandfather had settled in 1906 when he came with my grandmother, where my father was born and where I was born. And this is the core counties. And we were there until you could see the dramatic increase when my granddad gets there. 792 folks in Zavala County, that's that last line at the bottom. And these are huge counties. The Zavala County is 750,000 acres. 20 miles this way, 40 miles that way, etc. And look at the recruitment of the labor, and of course the Mexican Revolution and the chaos that follows. It grows tenfold just in 10 years, and again grows. Now you'll see that most of these counties level off in the population. All of the 4 counties in the so-called Winter Garden area level off. Why? Well, because of the migration. The Great Depression just dislocates all of those settlements in those agricultural growing areas, and people start growing. These are both my grandmothers. The woman on the left was born in the Native American villages right off of Musquis. Very old community. We call them Coahuiltecas. The individual tribes are named distinctly, but we refer to them after their name of that state. You can see her Native American features as a result. This beautiful woman here, we don't know what her background. She was an orphan. The Barrientos family in Eagle Pass, Texas, sheltered her right after birth, and we believe that she was abandoned by whoever her birth mother was because of her complexion. And of course, the mix of the mestizo, the Native American, and the Spanish also included mestizaje of Afro-Mexicans, and that's why she was, we understood, she was abandoned. But as I indicated earlier, the Great Depression dislocates all of these multi-generation families in the Working Garden area, and including, by the way, if some of you are interested in that area, we are familiar with Dorothy Parker, that those images that are given to us by these photographers that travel all through America and took very extraordinary pictures of some of the conditions of our country. One of them went to Zavala County, and you should see the pictures of what the Depression and the living conditions of that community. You see children with extended families, unattended illnesses of their families. I refuse to call this a home, I call it a shelter. But you can see the conditions of the impact of the Great Depression and the reason why they started migrating out of the area. We appreciate, some of us that are interested in the families that are coming from Latin America and what is going on in their home countries, and the violence that they're fleeing. Don't really realize what compelled these families, hundreds of thousands of migrant workers, to come from the Texas borderlands to the Midwest. This is a repatriation. These are somewhat our former president would call bad odors, right? Actually, repatriation is a misnomer, because the majority of these children who are being sent across the border during the Great Depression and used as scapegoats were born in the United States. But again, if you look at by the way, some of these images and stories of some of these families are right in the history of the former INS offices. That's where I got this picture. And of course, our involvement in the Second World War and the attack that we suffered after the attack by the Japanese in 1941 leads to an arrangement with a treaty between the United States and Mexico, where instead of repatriating the Mexican families, we signed a treaty with Mexico to bring in Mexican laborers, primarily male braceros, from the word brazos. There were about 50,000 that came during the war years, but we got so used to cheap labor, and of course they were using this labor to break strikes and to stop the agricultural workers from joining unions. In 1965, there were over 400,000 of these folks that were coming in to the United States until they were stopped in 1965. Some of the other reasons why people migrated from the Texas borderlands was apartheid. There's been an ongoing discussion about the use of that term because we're used to using that term, of course, when we describe governments like the South African one that Mandela was so significant in overthrowing. But along the borderlands where I spent my childhood, we actually lived in two communities. There were two cemeteries. Not even in death were we allowed to join with each other. The schools were segregated, and when this internment or prisoner of war camp was closed, this became the Mexican school. I spent my whole elementary school years in a former prisoner of war camp. The towers were gone and the barbed wire was removed, but it still felt like you were in an internment camp. The front part of it here was my elementary school. The other reason that people were fleeing was poll taxes, or that is our inability to be able to select our own representatives. And by the way, I included the 40-some years of poll taxes in Texas from 1902 when it was passed. My granddad started paying his taxes. I have some from 1913. This is all the way up to 19. I don't know who he voted for or for whom he voted for. All I knew is that when my grandfather passed, by the way, I never met him, he had left my grandmother a shoebox. Evidently, he had been charged for a pair of shoes twice, and he told my grandmother, so that never happens to you, keep all your important receipts in this shoebox, and that's where I found these items, like the poll taxes and other items. The Texas borderline communities migrate to the Midwest. You can see the Winter Garden area and the migration. We made it to the Midwest and eventually to Wisconsin, but other migrants went into the Plain States. My wife who is here, their families used to go up to the Red River Valley between Minnesota and the Dakotas to Owenston, Sugar Beach. Our migration was primarily to Wisconsin. This is one of the first trips that my father made to the state of Wisconsin. Here he is. By the way, there was already a community here, and the book that Sergio wrote talks about the Mexicanos in Wisconsin, including the Milwaukee area. So while he was hoeing and feeding sugar beets in Hartford, Wisconsin, they used to come on weekends to socialize. And here they're right down the street from National Avenue. And I wonder if Sergio can tell us a little bit of what was going on with what we call Los Primeros in Milwaukee.
Los Primeros begin arriving in Milwaukee in the 1920s. They're brought here for industrial labor. And by the end of the 1920s, there's about 5,000 to 7,000 Mexicanos living here on the south side of Milwaukee, right here in the Walker's Point area along Mitchell Street. In the 1930s, as Jesus talked about, decimates the Latino community, the Mexican community. A lot of people are forced to leave the city because the jobs disappeared during the Great Depression. And so by the end of the 1930s, the community is really decimated. But World War II is a period where you start to see a lot of Mexican Americans and Mexicanos coming directly from Mexico begin to repopulate again as there are jobs booming in the city. So Manuel's place here in Milwaukee is part of that larger arrival of more Mexicanos.
Yeah, and now that you mentioned the Second World War and the impact that it had on Los Primeros, while my father came, his younger brother had turned 18, and he signed up for the Selective Service in Fond du Lac. And he got a letter from Texas, hey, you got, because he put his permanent address as being in Crystal City, you got a letter from the Selective Service, you're supposed to report for duty. So they all leave to go back to Texas because my father's younger brother is about to be joining our soldiers. And he said, no, you signed up in Fond du Lac, you're going with the Wisconsin Red Arrow Division. So he ended up fighting in the Pacific and with the occupying forces in Japan and the disarmament of the Japanese army after they surrendered. You can see his logo here on the Wisconsin Arrow Division and his training there during the Second World War. Right after the Second World War ended, I have a picture of 8th grade graduation where I'm dancing with one of my classmates. Something that was not only prohibited back home under segregation, but that was illegal. So it was really quite an experience, and it gave me a completely different orientation to the relationship between communities, Mexican and non-Mexican. Well, we graduated, we relocated. My father said, you know, if you're ever going to be going to school, we need to resettle. Then we attempted to buy an abandoned farm, but we never had the resources to be able to buy the agricultural implements. We depended on our very wonderful neighbors that we had to help us cultivate the crops. And we ended up buying this place. As you can see, this is the first year that we made, and we put Salas, but you know at the bottom, they're still announcing who made pies. The woman, Mrs. B. Kitzer, who ran this 6 or 8 tables restaurant, was known for her pies, and she hung herself in the kitchen. I don't know why, but nobody wanted to rent the doggone place because of that. And here we go with my dad. Dad, are you sure you want to go into this place? Nobody will want to come in there, knowing that the ghost of Mrs. Kitzer is somewhere in the back of the kitchen. But he said, no, we'll do it. So we got a land contract and finally bought the joint. But after he lost his slave labor, and it's all of us cheap labor that worked there waiting on tables, we had to sell the place. But we made a go of it for 20-some years. Anyway, while I was working in the restaurant, these people from the Division of Children and Youth from the state of Wisconsin came over and says, hey, you're one of the Salases, right? Yeah. He said, you know where the labor camps? Yeah, I worked in a whole bunch of them. Can you take us out there to see if we can encourage families to send their children to a demonstration daycare program? So this is the first daycare program for migrant children supported by the state. As you can see, I'm the only person that is bilingual in this. And so what I do is I go to Texas, my former hometown, and I contact individuals who I had gone to school with who are now involved in a political revolt because we got the franchise. So as I go down there, my uncle is running. He's the veteran that I told you about. He's running for Justice of the Peace in 1965. Very, very bashful. He thinks he's not a very good speaker. So I go down there and introduce him and actually make a speech for him. So here I am talking about the why they should elect my uncle and recruiting teachers for the bilingual program. Well, for the daycare program. Well, oops, what did I do? How do I go back to like this? So the Wisconsin filed the first complaints on minimum wages, workers' compensation, violations of housing code, and you see that McCann here lifting this is before he was district attorney, by the way. He just finished his work with law school at Harvard. That's Alan Sampson over there. Kessler, very young assembly person at that time, is not in the picture. And he came to one of our rallies by this friend of ours by the name of Elizabeth Brandeis Rauschenbusch. And I asked him, I said, what we could do to enhance health services for migrant workers. And he said, we have this blue bus. All the blue buses for very obvious reasons. We go and park it over to the Mifflin Street area, which at that time was the center of the University of Wisconsin campus. And anybody that wants to come in and get checked out for an STD, they are welcome to do. We keep all the records to ourselves, and nobody has to worry about that. And he said, you know, we could drive the blue bus over to Watoma. Can you get me a place where we could park it and we'll open up a migrant health clinic? This is a former parish hall of the Catholic St. Joseph Catholic Church. Remember the Father Garrigan, who was in the initial march several years earlier? He allowed us to use this. We parked the blue bus on the side, and we had a ready-made laboratory to do blood work, to do other kinds of activities that the doctors thought was necessary. It's primarily for women and children. That they, by the way, still going on. 50 years later, of course, now supported by the federal and state government in the former hospitals. We had a gasoline co-op so that when migrants came, they wouldn't have their prices increase. And you could look at the price of gasoline there, 31 cents, not bad, huh? And they were still making money at 31 cents. But we opened up a gasoline co-op when we allowed the migrants to use the hydraulic lift to take care of their thing. In 1968, while we were organizing the walkouts for the levy, this family here, the Eva Valenzuela, got thrown out of a camp, labor camp by the Wilcox farms. John Wilcox later became district attorney, assembly person, and occupied the Wisconsin Supreme Court. He fired Eva Valenzuela for wearing a union button while she and her husband were harvesting cucumber. And so what we did right behind the gasoline co-op, we put up a tent and we sent the word out. Anybody, any other family that gets thrown out for wearing a union button in the fields, we're going to fill the doggone downtown with tents of migrant families. And of course, Watua was a tourist center, and they didn't want all these Mexicans to be there in the middle of the park on the summer. So here's Eva Valenzuela. By the way, there's a picture outside showing that the Wilcoxes had to pay for 2 weeks of work that she before court date for being fired illegally. And of course, who was the audiences? Families. Again, you have to remember the reason that you're going to continue to see families in this picture is because the workforce is family-based. And that's our success here in the city of Milwaukee when we started organizing and intersecting in the civil rights movement, because we continue to organize families rather than the traditional labor union that organized primarily labor, male labor. Here's that image of the walkout in Hartford, Wisconsin. And after almost 5 years, couldn't get a contract, we're spinning our wheels, and Chavez says, you know, Salas, if you continue to help me with a boycott, but not here, go to the urban areas where, you know, you've got people to confront, to stop buying grapes. And once we win in California, I'll come back and help you in Wisconsin. And as I told you, who was to know that it was going to take us 5 years of boycotting before the first great boycott? I had never even visited large urban areas, let alone live. I've lived in migrant camps for the last 10 years, resettled in Watoma, less than 10,000 folks. So here I come to Milwaukee to organize a great boycott for Cesar Chavez. And in closing, what's going on in Milwaukee at that time?
I mean, I don't think a lot of people need to know what's happening in the late 1960s in Milwaukee. It's a hotbed for civil rights activism. Milwaukee has been not just in the state news, but national news for the 200 consecutive nights of marching from the north side to the south side, led by the Young Commandos and Father Grappi, as Black Milwaukeeans are fighting for the right to have open housing across the city of Milwaukee. And so you arrive at a time when the city has already earned the title of being the Selma of the North, right? This area of hotbed, not only of racial segregation, but of civil rights protesting. And it's shifting as well. The movement is beginning to shift as well.
Yeah, and just like you said, Father Maurice Chavez, when we brought Chavez to Wisconsin, San Crispano became the site of the visit, and Father Maurice had begun to support the Great Boycott. He was also in UMass, by the way. He was a member of the board of UMass. And he allowed the Great Boycott offices to be established at the Centro, in the back room. And what is going on 3 blocks down the street from the Spanish Center? Father Grappi has just marched from the north side and started picketing Alan Bradley to demand equal employment enforcement of those individuals who are getting governmental contract. And that's how I meet Father Grappi. We had been picketing, so Father Grappi would say, Jesus, you know, you're doing a great job. You get all these people to come and organize a great boycott, but here you are, week after week, month after month, you know, you're gonna get a little bit of direct action. What is direct action? Well, you know, the longer that the grocers and these people keep you on the picket line, you increase the tension a little bit. That's what direct action is. So, oh yeah, well that makes sense, right? So, but we started out, instead of just leafleting and asking people to stop. Here's Father Grappi. We're at Cole's Food Store on Capitol Avenue, and he after I go and meet him at the Allen Bradley, he joins the picket line. By the way, this is Barbara David. She used to be a member of the youth council, and the gentleman in the hat is my brother Frank. Father Grappi brings her along, and they get married. Father Grappi and Father Maurice officiate at their wedding. A whole bunch of youth council members and Chicanos from the labor movement show up at the wedding. Well, following Father Grappi, Cole's Food Store keeps us out there for over a month, and we've decided to take a little bit of direct action. We walk into the store and tell people standing right in front of the grapes that not to buy them. Of course, you know what's going to happen. The only problem is we didn't know how this whole system worked. I'd never been arrested in my life. They took us, this was Friday night. You never wanted to go to jail on Friday night. You have to spend a whole long weekend there until the judge shows up. Oh, geez, you know, and of course you have to have the mouthpiece ready. Don't be looking for lawyers from jail. You have to have bail set up. So we learned how to do that very effectively later on. But at this time we didn't know that. The other thing that happens is not just the relationship with Father Grappi, but as Sergio said, what was going on with the two movements. Now, these pictures have never been shown before, by the way. This is the intersection of the farm worker movement and the Black Civil Rights movement. There's Lloyd Barbie, the segregator of the public schools. There's Bill Phillips, the first African-American woman in the Civil Council. There's Orville Pitts, first black county board of supervisor. They all got the boycott buttons, and you're going to see Latin American Union for Civil Rights, Chaconi. He's in the back there somewhere. Organizing walkouts in support of Barbie's desegregation lawsuit and demanding bilingual education and celebration of the Fiestas Patrias, and of course the celebration of Mexican Fiesta. That'll come a little bit later. The other thing that occurs is United Migrant Opportunity Service. Now, just let's look at the south side a little bit. I'm at 524 West National. We've been picketing Allen Bradley just a couple of blocks down this east towards the lake at Allen Bradley at that time, represented by the United Electrical Workers. On 8th and Greenfield, humans had just moved from Waukesha to 8th and Greenfield, the old orphanage place. And what was the issue there? And all 5 Anglo dominated the 80 employees that Humas had. There were all of the Mexican field workers were in the outreach program. All of the administrative and coordinating positions were non-Mexicans. So we demanded maximum feasibility of participation. The all-Anglo team got panicky, thinking that the board was going to support us. They formed a new organization. They threatened to resign if they wouldn't get contracts. So we insisted that the board not give them contracts. They formed a new organization thinking that the Office of Economic Opportunity was going to give the money to them, and they didn't. So after a couple of meetings, the Humas took a chance, and they selected me as a new coordinator. And I said, look, I told you that I had no interest in a long-term relationship at Humas. I'll only stay through this funding cycle, right? Until things get stabilized. So I stayed there two funding cycles. When we hired all these Latinos as the administrators, we took a top-down organization, developed into area councils. By the way, Chacon, by the way, is also a member of the board and assisted us at that time. And we also hired that young man in the back there, Lupe Martinez, who's still there, and by the way, has done an extraordinary job. There's Bill Phillips, and in order to get the board to support what we're doing, the training sessions that we had. And by the way, Chacon is a great believer in training. And like Cesar Chavez used to say, there's no natural born leaders. That's a common usage of the term. It's so mistaken. He says you have to be trained. You can have personal qualities of leadership, but if you want to be a leader, you have to learn how to lead. And so we're having these training sessions both for the board, and we have the first Latino candidate in the city of Milwaukee. There's Dante Navarro in the center with the tie. Right next to him is Ezequiel Guzman, who had been an organizer for Obreros Unidos. Later was hired to run the credit union at the Spanish Center, and Salvador, who followed me at UMass. Governor Lucy saw the activity that we had, set up an Hispanic desk, and here he's touring the south side. We took him over to the Holton Street area to visit primarily at that time a Puerto Rican community, and here he's visiting the south side. Right next to him, Carlos Sevilla, who took over Father Maurice's position at the board. So one of the things that we did with the announcement, almost closing now, in the interaction with the African American community, we joined in the welfare protest. And basically the welfare protest was to dismantle the safety net for the indigent in the state of Wisconsin. And what the racist legislators were saying at that time was that Mexicans and African Americans were moving to Wisconsin to take advantage of the higher welfare rates, right? And so we joined the African American community, and we marched to Madison. After we occupied the Assembly Hall, we wouldn't leave, and the National Guard was called to remove us from the premises. In the downtown protest of the welfare march, Chacon and Jose Puentes were arrested, coming to the aid of one of the welfare recipients, and were very summarily sentenced to 6 months in jail, and we began a multi-month protest to free Chacon and Puente. You can see these marches, by the way, are massive. This is over 500 people marching to free Chacon and Puente. And the other area, as we're implementing maximum feasibility of participation, Maurice had resigned, Carlos Sevilla had followed him. The concentrated employment program was opened here in the south side, run also by a Latino Latin American Union, had set up the Brown Berets. Altogether, we had to open up the spot, a youth recreational center. So there was a great demand for running these agencies, and nobody had the basic requirements which required college degrees. So University of Wisconsin was crucial to the success of the south side. And we demanded access. At that time, I had enrolled at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Out of 25,000 students, all the Latinos could sit around one table. So we started picketing again, and they wouldn't respond. The chancellor wouldn't respond to establishing the Spanish-speaking Outreach Institute. Here, Chacon is addressing the crowd. By the way, right during the early parts of the challenge to the Spanish-speaking, in demanding the Spanish-speaking Outreach Institute, Marla Anderson, one of her family members is here, Nelson is here, had been arrested. So there's a chapter there that I talked about, Las Adelitas. Right, that is these three women, Marla Anderson, who had been arrested with me, and then the woman with a black scarf there, Maria Ortega, the woman right behind her, Clementina Castro. All the three women were referred to as Las Adelitas. There isn't a single political manifestation during this period of time where those three women are not involved, and I dedicate a whole chapter. By the way, on the far left is Reverend Davila with some of the parishioners. Behind Chacon is Roberto Hernandez, the Spanish-speaking Outreach Institute is named after him, and right behind Roberto Hernandez, in front of, to the side of him is me. Okay? Well, nothing is working, so we decided to go on a fast and camp out in front of the chancellor's office, and we've been there about a week. I have eaten in about a week where I can no longer pick it anymore. I'm so weak. And if you know anything about the Chancellor's office, as you walk in, the bathrooms are right there to the right. You don't have to walk into the inner part of the building. So as we're camping outside, protesting, the Chancellor agrees to allow us to use the bathroom. So he has a guard there 24 hours a day to make sure that we don't go into the further area of the Chancellor's office. Well, after about 7 days, I get up to, relieve myself, and the guard is gone. So I go back to all the people who are sleeping on the ground there. It's October, it's really cold. And I say, hey, you guys are supposed to be in the Chancellor's office. The guard has left, and the new one, the replacement hasn't showed up. So we took over, make a long story, we took over the Chancellor's office, locked it. By the way, as we're planning all of these, one of the Vice Chancellor walks in, and he goes into the bathroom. We lock him in the bathroom. You guys are not supposed to do this. This is after a month of picketing, right? We're desperate, right? So we lock the Chancellor, and then we start calling. By the time they realize the Chancellor is yelling out the window, help, help, 5 o'clock in the morning, who's gonna hear? So we start calling, and we start getting buses of family members, and we got hundreds of people now in the Chancellor's office. So by the time they wake up, there's all these people inside. So finally, they send the Vice Chancellor over and says, okay, we're ready to talk about establishing the Spanish-speaking Outreach Institute. They knew we were going to leave them and try to fight. So that's how the University of Wisconsin Left Center gets established. Don't let anybody else tell you any different. They never ceded this right that we had to belong to the university. We had to fight for it. One of the stories, this is really something. We are celebrating the establishment of Spanish-speaking outreach. We want to do it on campus, right? So we have this auditorium. Hundreds of people are showing up there in the podium talking about what we're going to do in the future and that. Over there in the back room, there's these women that are lining up at the women, and they come over and they grab my microphone from me. They crash the meeting, and Iracema Flores starts saying, we're not going to take this crap from you guys anymore, right? What are you talking about? All you macho. They were complaining about the fact that we were a male-dominated leadership of the community. At that time, women were not allowed to go into bars. Traditionally, not anybody prevented them. But even if they served restaurants, women could order a drink. So here, after every manifestation, we used to go into the bars. And what do you do after spending all day picketing, right? Except for having a good time. And then the women would say, yeah, and the next thing you got it all planned for us, right? We'd show up and you say, you do this and you do that. We're not going to take this in. And I'm just flabbergasted. Look what we got ourselves into. But I think the story behind this is what? That women, you don't have a youth movement unless you have families involved and youngsters involved. You don't have a women's movement unless you have families involved. And the reason that we have this is because we organize a family base, but they wanted a little bit more access to the leadership of these programs that we're taking over and that we're establishing. This is one of the Chacon again with the school walkouts. Again, it starts out as the celebration of the Fiestas Patrias. One of the things that Chacon does, and you can attest to this, you speak of this, los primeros, at least the Mexicans that come in the 20s and 30s, start celebrating Mexican independence Day since then. But what Chacon and the Latin American Union and other Latinos do is they politicize the movement. You can see Chicano power over here. You can see demanding bilingual programs. You can see developing hiring of bilingual staff. And then this dovetails with Lloyd Barton's desegregation. So when the desegregation lawsuit is going on, we have a community that is ready to also be included in the desegregation plans. Here's some of the early days of the marches. Again, we're supporting Chacon, Ruano, Oscar Cervera, selling Christmas trees to support soccer teams, both for boys and girls. And we have some of the best young soccer teams for males and females in the school system. And here we are with a bit. And then we'd have these block parties. Now, block parties are very typical. This is in front of the church, and so this is not new. What is new is the way we politicize these block parties. where we demanded bilingual education, and we urged the desegregation of the schools. By the way, look at the diversity of those crowds that supported us in these early days. And by the way, this is a precursor of Mexican Fiesta. By the time the lakefront activities are opened up for Summerfest, and let's be honest how they were opened up. They were opened up to cool so that we wouldn't have hot summers anymore, right? That's when Mayor Mario started having activities in the lakefront to try to cool off some of these riots that were going on. So when we walk in with a whole community. And the director of the Mexican Fiesta is right here, is sitting in front of us. So that when we moved to Mexican Fiesta, all we were asking for, and we didn't get the first couple of years, was nice weather. But now, now we're one of the most successful ethnic festivals at the Summerfest grounds, thanks to the leadership of a whole community, and today of this lady that's sitting right in front of me. And I thought I'd include this, because this is one of the activities that we wanted for our community. We wanted outreach activities by the librarians. Again, that whole background story that I told you about the libraries and our family as a migrant worker was not lost in there. This is one of the first efforts by the Milwaukee Public Library to come out to the Latin community and engage our youngsters. And that's why we have in some of our schools a very high graduation rates, is because of these activities we started. Well, the last activity, the same thing that the resistance to establish the Spanish-speaking Outreach Institute occurred in Madison, where we demanded the establishment of Chicano studies very rapidly. You can see they're commemorating a 1975 demand for Chicano Studies Department. This is 1983. This effort takes almost a decade. I don't have time to spend on all the activities that went on. Let me just say that it took that long year. We're negotiating with letters and signs for the establishment of Chicano Studies. I'm a member of, as a graduate student, of the advisory committees. Right next to me is law student Saldana. Right next to him is Evan, professor at the University of Wisconsin at University of Texas in Austin back in the 80s. The cultural aspects that we had started here in Milwaukee that were part of Mexican Fiesta, they're part now. We began also, this is Manos Avila, who we supported at every event that we had, and for them to buy costumes. We used to hear their dancing in their Aztec costumes in front of the library hall. Actually, in front of the Wisconsin Historical Society offices in protesting cultural activities also in Madison. And then lastly, education, in-state tuition for families who spent from 3 to 5 years working in the migrant fields. Mario Caballero is initiating. Very rapidly, the University of Wisconsin refusing my closing remarks. With Chicano Studies, when we recommended the establishment of offering Chicano Studies academic courses, they said that they didn't have the money. So I have been working with legislatures since the 1960s and had excellent contact with the Wisconsin legislature. I started going right after every class for 5 days a week while they were in session, and we successfully amended the University of Wisconsin budget and created $50,000 for offering Chicano academic courses at the University of Wisconsin. The University of Wisconsin College of Letters and Science says they were pissed. They didn't park me. But they didn't ask for the money. They told the legislature, we don't want it. They gave the money to the School of Education. School of Education hired recruiters. That's not what the money is for. The money was to offer academic courses. It took us 10 years to get, first of all, get that money from the School of Education back to the Letters and Science, and almost a decade. The other thing we did in the same period of time, this is 1974, 1975, San Francisco Chinese students went before the United States Supreme Court and argued that they were not getting a equal opportunity to get an education. In San Francisco, the Supreme Court declared that they had to be taught in their own English, in their own language, thus establishing the bilingual programs nationally. There had been in 1968 a bilingual program, but it was in effect, it was almost voluntary and not didn't have much of an impact on our community. So the Lau versus Nichols Supreme Court decision 1964 led to the establishment of the bilingual, bicultural program here, law here. Now, by that time, we already had the Spanish-speaking Artists Institute. Dr. Fernandez is working there. Tony Baez is working there. We had UMass established already, teaching adult education. We had established all these daycare centers of bilingual education. So there was a network of services that actually supported the creation of this extraordinary program. And then the migrant labor law. Again, the same period of time, 1975 it started, it was passed in 1977. Again, Chacon was, Samudio and a number of other individuals were involved with that bill. Was passed in 1975. You can't hire migrant workers unless you have a work agreement. You cannot have crew leaders unless they're registered. You cannot house migrant workers unless their housing is certified, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, wonderful piece of legislation, unlike any other in the United States. And lastly, the migrant tuition bill. The last one, the migrant tuition bill at Chicano Studies was passed by us as students at the University of Wisconsin. The other two, the migrant labor law, was a community effort here that had started a very long time ago. And of course, the bilingual started now versus Nichols. And I'm going to close. That doesn't mean the need for legislative initiatives. Second, would you just close some of the initiatives that you've been involved with legislatively that are still on the table? They're right here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to know, to remember here as we finish up our time, is that Jesus' book is about legacies. It's not about the work of the past, it's the work that we have left in front of us. And all of us in the room know that despite all the wonderful work of the community over the last 60 years, that there's a lot more work ahead of us. When Jesus served on the Board of Regents for the University of Wisconsin system, he helped shepherd through tuition, in-state tuition for undocumented students here in Wisconsin, so they wouldn't have to pay the fees of international students. A year after they passed that, however, Governor Walker rescinded that. And so now that's an open question that undocumented students have to fight for. Organizations like Voz de la Frontera are fighting on a number of different fronts. One of the biggest tasks we have in front of us right now, of course, is driver's license for undocumented residents. So they don't have to be afraid every single time they get behind a wheel to go to jobs or to take their kids to school across the state of Wisconsin. And so I think the important thing for us to remember as we hear these wonderful stories is that people like Jesus have laid the groundwork, have given us a path for us to follow as we continue these fights here across the state of Wisconsin.
Well, also look, we're talking about the undocumented. One of the things about the Mexican Fiesta, it was reorganized and changed into the Wisconsin Hispanic Scholarship Foundation. None of the ethnic festivals had that focus in terms of what are your existence? What are you going to do with the returns of over at the Summerfest Council? Scholarships. And of course, they don't distinguish between what I think you've given $1,700,000 in scholarships.
9.
9 now, yeah, right. When I wrote the book, it was 1.7. At the University of Wisconsin, when we celebrated the 40th year, we set up an endowment fund. Now it's over $200,000 that also gives aid for books and that also includes support for bilingual. Did the same thing in Madison, Tess Arenas, and we have been supporting scholarships over there. Again, you can't do it just financial aid because financial aid doesn't cover a whole community. So,
well, we are at about time. I want to give a round of applause to Jesus for that. We have the room until about 4:30, and to respect everyone's time, we're going to do some Q&A.